This is News Talk 1090, WKBC, talking Muskegon. Authentically speaking with Marnie. Hello. Hello, Bridget. I have Bridget here again with me today. This is exciting.
Good morning. Good afternoon, Marnie.
Yeah, it is, isn't it?
Yeah, it's both right now, so.
I guess. Depends on where you're at.
Yes.
Eastern time, it is now afternoon. Well, we've had some great conversations in the last few weeks about pursuing your passion, getting to understand what your passion is, identifying a passion. I think that's the big one. A lot of us struggle with that. So this week, what I want to talk about, we discussed this a little bit, perception and how that plays a role, and how it is that we create our passion and how it is that we're manifesting what it is that we want. Perception's huge. Perception is a big component of it, and it kind of shapes our actions. It shapes our I think it has a direct link to what our thoughts are. Our perception does. And I was really playing with this earlier, having some deep thinking about it. And to me, it goes either way. You know, I had a hard time with this. It's like, okay, is what I'm seeing and what I'm hearing or what I'm feeling at an emotional level, determining what I'm thinking, or is it my thoughts that's dictating what my emotions are and because that plays a direct role with your perceptions as well. So what do you think?
I'm being challenged, from our conversation this morning even, about perception being kind of two different roles. I was thinking about our conversation last week and about having individuals kind of begin to look at things in a different way and turn them around and kind of challenge themselves on that. It was sort of an exercise we kind of talked about that comes from that passion exercise. And then as I was thinking a little bit more this week and doing a little bit more research, I was kind of challenged by the idea that there's two different orientations, it seems, with perception that really influences how we live out what we want to live out in the passion. And one of them is, a piece that I read about that really states that your perception can come and influence how others behave. I mean, so there's that outward, that external perception and how that plays into how you feel about yourself and how you respond to others, which clearly affects them. And then there's that how you internalize what people are doing towards you and how they're behaving towards you. So it kind of is coming from two different external and internal. And I didn't come to any conclusions with that, in terms of how that plays into passion,
and even people, the behaviors that you're talking about, that external, the behaviors people exhibit toward you, is a perception in itself. Because it's our self-image that's taking in this information all around us and interpreting it. It's our own self-image. So it's not. In doing what I do with personal development, I teach people accountability, and I teach them how to accept responsibility for their own feelings and their own behaviors and the own way that they think, because nothing external can really dictate that.
I was going to say, right, it's a absorption of how we respond to that external and then what we do with it that helps us begin that, hopefully that perception of this is acceptable, this isn't. It goes all into boundary setting too.
This opens up a huge door to many different topics.
Definitely.
Really that all feed into the same thing. But perception is one of those topics that gets me really, really excited to talk about, and probably because of my psych background and my years being even a speech therapist, where I've worked, I have a background in neurology, and the brain absolutely fascinates me. But it's even more than that. Now, when I look at this from all the different levels and studying from a spiritual component too that I have, it's much bigger than that, because it's sensory input on every level. So not just our brain.
That's a great way. Yeah, that's a great way for me to understand that too. Is you're right. It's a lot of different components going into where we're going to feel comfortable and what's acceptable to us. That dichotomy that I was mentioning to you, we had talked about something I used when in one of my speaking engagements, and I began thinking about it in terms of its application to older adults because that's my field. But then I realized, well, this is so beyond that. Really, it's any age. It's how we qualify our descriptions of people who may be disabled and what we think of when we see someone in a wheelchair. That individual may be perfectly capable, perfectly competent, living a completely independent life, but we have those initial reactions, born out of a lot of different things that got us there. With teens, when you intergenerational programming I've done, an older adult will see a teen and go, oh, troublemaker, and the teenager will look at the older adult and go, oh, old geezer, and it's these learned responses, and then when they become though acceptable to a larger group, that really influences how they behave toward that person. And if I'm that person on the receiving end of that, it really gives me a lot of food for thought to think about, am I really this perception? Is this really who I am and I'm missing it? Or no, this is not who I am. And so my role is to be able to help contribute, influencing how people behave towards me and others like me.
Exactly. That's what we're talking about. You mentioned boundaries. It's another thing, when you're talking about age and the different ages, even at teens, and we have the societal programming, really is what this is. In our society, we see people at 65 are retiring, and then this happens, and then this happens, and we call them senior citizens, and we have names and we have labels for these things. That's just programming. Mm-hmm. That's just a societal thing. I was reading this morning about perceptions. I read super quick, so I hope I don't blow this in trying to describe it, but this is what I got out of reading this one article this morning when it talked about the different cultures and perception. And the studies that they've done in looking at Westerners, how they perceive, let me dig for this for a second, exactly what they were having them look at. Let's say it's different words, or it was animals. So we teach this, even as a speech therapist, I found this funny, that we teach kids language based on categorization because brains, we look at brains and we categorize information to gain an understanding and how things are connected. So we look at things that way, and I teach kids that. But then that's the Westerners. Honestly, we see if you have a picture of a cow, a chicken, and grass, which two go together, and the Americans might say the cow and the chicken because they're farm animals, and somebody in China or Japan or whatever might look at that and say, well, the cow goes with the grass because they eat the grass, and the grass goes with the chicken because, they're looking at it as a whole.
Mm-hmm. Holistic, yeah, good point. Mm-hmm.
Westerners, they were saying, look at things. So in our society, we're looking at objects, and we're not looking at the connection as a whole, where other societies do. And I found that very interesting. So talk about, a weird shift in perception and just the society, how we're shaping some of our beliefs and
how ingrained they are.
Based on an object. I found that really intriguing. And I have seen this with little kids when they start to try to make connections between objects, and I'm working with them, their perception is the same way. They're that open to the whole. And so it had me sitting back going, who's right and who's wrong?
Good point. Yeah, really. And where do we go with those different frames of reference? There's a couple of things that go through my mind when you're saying this. One is just based on the research that I've done, again, in my industry, is taking a look at why, when individuals get older, get to retirement age, why there is a spend happily ever after into the sunset. We've talked about, if you're not financially contributing, if you're not working, you're not. And taking what you're saying about, bringing back to what you're saying about objects, it's interesting to me how influential the fact is that we were such an industrial society. And so objects and factories and things that based our society, we're only a 200, 300-year-old society compared to European societies. We were based on objects almost. And that's where value and understanding came from. We're in a post-industrial era now, and you and I have talked about this is really a time where the creative spirit and the creativity of individuals can really drive our future. As a whole, that right brain, creative mind, that book we were talking about, how the right brain, creative mind can really be the force of the future. That right there gets us away from that object, I think, definition, potentially. So we're kind of in a whole new revolution maybe even, of how perceptions are established.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think from an educator's perspective, when I was reading this morning, and I haven't had enough time to now just sit and ponder this, but even as I talk about it, it draws up a bit of a concern with me that we have a really long way to go, because we're acknowledging this stuff at a certain point in our lives, and we're adults and we can weed through information. We have the ability, if we choose to critically think through things and come to a new decision and change that information. But at a young age, with these children, they're being taught that if I get children coming to me in speech therapy to work with them for language therapy, so I don't just do teaching kids R's and S's like a lot of people think. I get kids coming to me with a concern as being language delayed or having a language disability, so to speak, because they can't make these connections and problem solve the way that we want them to, or categorize things. But if we were to take them and put them in, in Asian society, they're okay. They're not wrong. So this is just drawing up a bunch of different. I will have to sit and try to piece all this together, after the show, because I read this morning. But boy, that surely is giving me something very exciting, but frustrating to
Daunting
think about.
is the word that comes to my mind.
Where do you start to unravel that, and how do you get people to start looking at that and investigating it? And and it's hard to separate myself from that as an educator as well. I've been in that field working with children. That is such a passion of mine. Perception's everything.
And we've talked about, too, in using my own personal example, one of the things I was thinking about is, and then think about what we do with those children. They're put into special education. They're put in, defined as learning disabled, where in fact they're going to be the ones that are going to define our future. And I find that probably the biggest shortcoming, that and the most daunting perception to influence in terms of allowing people to live out their passion starts so young, but yet we're reinforcing the fact that if you don't think like the mainstream, or if you're using a new set of skills that were not that applicable years ago, but the perception still is there because the educational system, as you know, I'm sure, it's like turning the you're turning a ship around with that. How it does start so young. Because we're actually putting a negative label on some brilliance, quite frankly.
It is. It is. I absolutely agree with you. And that's kind of this last year, going back to working with kids again in a school district, raised up all these emotions within me. And I found myself expressing this and, sitting in my office going, it's a no-brainer to me. I can see it, and I can see what's happening, and then finding myself frustrated. Who is on the board of education that's developing this curriculum that's so far off base? But, that's a whole political thing I could get. So, and I don't really want to go there. But we're about ready to go to break. So I do want to come back to that. This is such a cool topic for me. I'm really excited right now.
It is.
So, yeah, we're going to take a break, and we'll come back to that in just a couple of minutes. This is 1090 AM WKBC, Talk of Muskegon, Authentically Speaking with Marnie.
Bad boys, what you want?